Hello and welcome to Django DRF Query Fundamentals course. My name is Xander. Now this tutorial is part of a whole course playlist available for free on YouTube. If you do like this course and you want to delve deeper, the full course is available for purchase at Udemy. Again, find all the resources and links in this video's description. Do remember to subscribe to the channel for weekly promotions, discounts, and of course Udemy course giveaways. Okay, so now we're cooking. Let's move on now to learn how to bulk insert data with the bulk create function. So in the previous tutorial, we saw how we can create single records in individual tables. So more often than not, we want to insert more than one record at a time. Let's take a look at how we can do that here in DRF. Right, so bulk create allows you to insert multiple objects into a database in a single query, and this helps improve performance. Example 2. Now I'm going to assume at this point you understand the code that we presented in the previous tutorial. So from this point onwards, I will create a boilerplate for the example. If everything has been explained before, I won't talk about it. If there are new elements, I will do. And then we can just purely focus on the actual database interaction. Right, so here we have the boilerplate for this next example. It's the same as the previous code. So we have extending the schema, so we add additional information into our API front-end UI documentation tool so that we can interact with the endpoint. This is a module 4. Right, so first of all, we're using the create method here. So we are still posting data into the database. We're capturing post HTTP requests. But this time I have created this code which will ensure requests contain a list of items before going any further. Else we will return a HTTP 400 bad request. So this is just going to make sure that what the data that we've received is actually a list, else there's no point going any further. Right, so with that in mind, let's go ahead and now serialize. So we go ahead and serialize the data. Remember, this time we are potentially working with multiple items. So we define many equals true. We might be creating multiple objects from our data. And then we can go ahead and check to see if the serialization was valid or not. Right, so two tasks that we're going to need to do. We need to convert the validated data to model instances without saving it. And then we can go ahead and use the bulk create function. So here we're going to use list comprehension. So let's go ahead and categories. So let's say categories equals, and then we go ahead and unpack the category data items. That's going to be for item in the serializer dot validated data. Okay, so we haven't used the category model yet, so we need to define that from, well, in actual fact, that's wrong. So the model is going to be from inventory.models. So that's where we're always going to find our models, in the inventory app. So we bring in the category. Let's move back down. So if you're not familiar with this, category is ** item. So this takes each dictionary that we send across from the client and unpacks it into keyword arguments for the category model. So this creates the category instances without saving them to the database. So we extract the data from our validated data and then we unpack it into a format, category objects that can be then saved into the database. Right, so now we have them in the correct format, we can now use bulk create. So for that, created categories equals category dot objects dot bulk create. So bulk create, and then we can pass in our data, which is our categories. Right, so on the client, the data starts its life out in this format, in JSON format, and this then gets passed across over in the request to our server. Now we're going to serialize this data, and it's going to then be converted into model instances so that Django can utilize it, so that we can then utilize our bulk create tool. So this is how the data then is presented before we use the bulk create tool. And then we can go ahead and use category.objects.bulkCreate function and then pass in the data we want to bulk insert into the database. Now you may have already noticed that we won't be creating, at least in this tutorial, any raw SQL code. So what we're looking at here is Django's ORM Object-Relational Mapping, which provides an abstract layer between Python code and the database. This allows us to interact with the database using Python objects rather than writing raw SQL queries. So here we use the Django ORM query language. Behind the scenes, Django is converting this into SQL to then send to the database to actually perform the operation. So here the category.objects, this represents a manager. So this is a manager for the category model. It provides a way for us to interact with the database for specific models. So here we are specifically saying that we want to interact with the category model or the category table in our database. So this is going to provide us the methods behind the scenes to actually perform the operations such as queries. And then this is extended with the bulk create method, which is the method we use to actually create the SQL code to create the bulk create statement so that we can insert multiple records into the database at once. You will commonly see this format being used in many of the queries that we generate in this course. Now you can dive really deep into this and ask yourself a number of different questions, and that would be time well spent in the long term, but for this course we aren't going to concentrate at that level of information. We simply need to define the table we want to work with, or model, category, objects. So this is the manager that automatically attaches to each model in Django. So this is going to allow us to perform the database queries on the model. And then we have the operation commands, as I call them, in this case, bulk create. Okay, so now we can update the response serializer. This is completely optional whether you want to return all the data back. It's not necessarily going to be required in all cases, but we're doing that in this example. So we're going to pass back or we're going to serialize the data or deserialize the data back and send that in the response to the client. Now we need to remember that we are sending many instances, so many equals true, and that should be it. So let's give this a go. Right, so back into the API front end here, we now have two endpoints, so we didn't need to set up the URL, and remember we are doing this automatically in our URLs. You can go ahead and inspect that. So this was called what's this called? Bulk insert. So you can see that the name of the class is being used for the endpoint. That might not be desirable. You can of course change that, but for the case of this course we're just going to keep it nice and simple in that way. Right, so if we take a look, we've added the extra information, extended the schema so that we can potentially try this out and insert some data. So you can see we've got one record here. So what I'm going to do is just set this up. Make sure we don't use more than 55 characters, remember, for the slug. Right, so that's one record. We need to make sure the syntax is correct. So let's create a second record here. Don't forget, don't add the semicolon at the end here. It won't work. So we're going to need a new name for a category and then a new slug because it needs to be unique, I think. And then let's go ahead and execute. You could add some more if you wanted to, but let's give that a go. So it looks like we have successfully 201. So we have successfully inserted that into the table, and you can see what is returned. The response, or the deserialized data that we've inserted into the database, that is returned in the response body. So there we have a basic example of using bulk create to bulk insert data from a client request.